The shuttle docked with a heavy metallic clang that shook Park's teeth. She gripped her small bag and took a deep breath. Through the viewport, she could see the massive warship stretching into the darkness of space. It was called the Starward Fang, and it would be her home for the next 6 months. Was 28 years old. She had black hair cut short for practical reasons, brown eyes, and a small frame that made her look younger than she was. She was not a soldier. She was not a warrior. She was a diplomatic liaison, which was a fancy way of saying she was sent to watch and learn and stay out of trouble. The airlock opened with a hiss. The smell hit her first. It was a thick, musky scent like wet fur and metal and something wild. Then she saw them. They were waiting on the other side. They stood over 7 feet tall, covered in fur that ranged from silver to dark brown. Their faces were like wolves, with long snouts filled with sharp teeth and golden eyes that seemed to glow in the dim light. Their bodies were built for power. Muscles moved under their fur like coiled springs. Each one had claws that could tear through steel. And they were all looking at her. Forced herself to step forward. Her legs felt weak, but she kept her face calm. She had studied them for months. She knew their customs, their history, their language. She knew that showing fear was the worst thing she could do. A large male stepped toward her. He was bigger than the others, with silver fur marked by old scars. His eyes were cold and hard. This was Alpha Commander, the leader of the ship and one of the most respected warriors in the fleet. "You are the human," he said. His voice was deep and rough, like stones grinding together. "Yes, Commander," replied. She kept her voice steady. "I am Lieutenant Park. I have been assigned as the diplomatic liaison between the human coalition and the Empire." Studied her for a long moment. His nostrils flared as he took in her scent. Then he made a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been a growl. "You are small," he said. "No claws, no fangs, thin skin that tears easily." He leaned closer and had to fight every instinct that told her to run. "What use are you?" "I am here to learn, Commander, and to help build understanding between our peoples." Stared at her for another long moment. Then he turned away. "Show her to the quarters we prepared for the human," he ordered one of his crew. "Keep her out of the way." That was her welcome. The first weeks were hard. They did not hide their feelings about her presence. To them, humans were a new species on the galactic stage. They had only made contact with alien life 30 years ago. They had no great fleets, no powerful weapons, no history of conquest. They were seen as children playing in a game meant for adults. Was given a small room near the back of the ship. It was cold and bare, with a bed that was too hard and lights that were too dim. The food was tough meat that she had to force herself to eat. Nobody talked to her unless they had to. But did not complain. She watched, she listened, she learned. She learned that they lived by a strict code of honor. Strength was respected above all else. Weakness was despised. Every member of the crew had their place in the pack hierarchy, and they fought to maintain or improve their position. Disputes were settled through ritual combat. The strong led. The weak followed or were cast out. She learned that family was everything to them. The pack was more important than the individual. They would die for each other without hesitation. Betraying the pack was the worst crime imaginable. And she learned about the Alpha family. Commander was mated to a female named Sira. She was slightly smaller than him, with beautiful dark brown fur and intelligent eyes. Unlike her mate, Sira showed small kindnesses, a nod of acknowledgement in the corridor, a slightly larger portion of food, nothing that would be noticed by others, but enough to make feel less alone. They had 3 cubs. Was the oldest, a female with her mother's dark fur and her father's fierce eyes. Bora was the middle child, a male who was quieter and more thoughtful than his siblings. Was the youngest, barely more than a baby, with silver fur so pale it was almost white. The cubs were the heart of the ship. Every crew member adored them. Often saw hardened warriors softening their voices and bending down to play with the little ones. In a society built on strength and combat, the cubs represented hope and the future. Kept her distance from them at first. She did not want to cause any problems, but the cubs were curious creatures and they had never seen a human before. It started with, the youngest cub had a habit of wandering away from his caretakers, exploring every corner of the ship. One day, found him sitting outside her door, staring up at her with huge golden eyes. "Hello," she said softly. Tilted his head. "You have no fur," he said in his small, high voice. Smiled. "No, humans do not have much fur." "Are you cold?" "Sometimes." Thought about this for a moment. Then he stood up and pressed his small, warm body against her leg. "I will keep you warm," he announced. Felt something in her chest that she had not felt since coming aboard the ship. It was warmth. It was connection. It was the beginning of something that would change everything. After that day, the cubs began to seek her out, would ask her questions about Earth, about human customs, about why humans did strange things like cook their meat or sleep lying down. Bora would sit quietly beside her while she read, content just to be near her, would climb into her lap and fall asleep. The crew noticed. Some were amused, others were annoyed, a few were openly hostile. "The human is getting too close to the Alpha's children," overheard one warrior say. "It is not proper." "She is harmless," another replied. "What could she possibly do? She cannot even fight." Pretended not to hear. She continued her duties, writing reports, attending meetings where she was mostly ignored, studying culture. But in her free time, she always made room for the cubs. Commander noticed too. One evening, he found sitting in the observation deck with all 3 cubs asleep around her, was curled up on one side, Bora on the other, and was sprawled across her lap. Stood in the doorway watching. His face was unreadable. "They like you," he said finally. Looked up at him. "They are good children." "They are. They should not be so attached to an outsider." Met his gaze without flinching. "With respect, Commander, children do not care about politics. They care about who is kind to them." His eyes narrowed. For a moment thought she had gone too far. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away. She did not know it then, but that moment had planted a seed of doubt in the Alpha Commander's mind. A seed that would grow into something unexpected when the darkness came. And the darkness was coming. 3 days later, the Starward Fang received a distress beacon from a remote moon at the edge of explored space. It was a standard call for help, the kind that any vessel was honor-bound to answer. They changed course immediately. They did not know they were flying into a trap. The moon was a dead rock floating in the void. It had no name, only a number in the star charts. Gray dust covered its surface. No plants grew there. No animals lived there. It was the kind of place that people forgot about, which made it perfect for those who did not want to be found. The Starward Fang dropped out of faster-than-light travel and began its approach. Commander stood on the bridge, his golden eyes scanning the readouts on the screens around him. "I do not like this," he said quietly. His second-in-command, a grizzled warrior named, nodded. "The beacon is coming from the far side of the moon. Our sensors cannot see what is there." "Send a probe." The probe launched. It curved around the moon, transmitting images back to the ship. Watched as the gray landscape rolled past on the screen. Rocks, craters, dust, nothing alive. Then the probe went dark. "What happened?" demanded. Before anyone could answer, the ship shook violently. Alarms began to scream. Red lights flashed across every corridor. "We are under attack," shouted. Multiple contacts emerging from behind the moon. They were hiding in the shadow. His fur bristled as he saw the ships on the tactical display. There were 12 of them, each one marked with a symbol that made his blood run cold. The Dominion. They were reptilian creatures, cold-blooded in every sense of the word. They were slavers and pirates who preyed on the weak and sold their captives to the highest bidder. They had fought them many times over the centuries. There was deep hatred between the two species. "All hands to battle stations," roared, "prepare to repel boarders." The ships were fast and deadly. They swarmed around the starward fang like hungry insects, firing weapons that weakened the shields. But they were not trying to destroy the ship. Realized this with growing horror. They were trying to board it. The first boarding pods hit the hull with a sound like thunder. Metal screamed as the pods cut through, forcing their way into the ship. Within seconds, soldiers were pouring through the breaches, firing stun weapons and shock prods. They wanted prisoners, not corpses. That meant they wanted something specific, someone specific. Understood in a flash of terrible clarity. "The Cubs," he shouted into his communicator. "All units protect the Cubs." But the ship was already in chaos. They had struck in 7 different locations, splitting the crew and creating confusion. Warriors fought desperately in the corridors, but there were too many attackers. For every that fell, 2 more seemed to take its place. Was in her quarters when the attack began. The explosion threw her from her bed and slammed her against the wall. Her ears rang. Smoke filled the air. She could hear screaming and gunfire somewhere in the distance. She grabbed her boots and pulled them on with shaking hands. Her door was jammed, the frame bent by the force of the impact. She kicked it once, twice, 3 times before it finally gave way. The corridor outside was filled with smoke and flickering lights. Emergency bulkheads were dropping throughout the ship, sealing off sections to contain the damage. Had to make a choice quickly, or she would be trapped. She thought of the Cubs. Their nursery was 3 levels up and 2 sections over. Began to run. She had memorized the layout of the entire ship during her weeks of observation, never imagining she would need it like this. Now that knowledge might save lives. She reached a junction just as a bulkhead began to close. Without thinking, she threw herself forward, sliding under the descending metal with inches to spare. Her shoulder hit the floor hard, but she ignored the pain and kept moving. The sounds of battle grew louder. She could hear the distinctive roar of warriors mixed with the hissing screams of the... Once, she passed a corridor where she glimpsed a massive fight, bodies locked together in brutal combat. She did not stop. Finally, she reached the nursery level. The emergency lights cast everything in a dim red glow. It was quiet here, too quiet. Moved carefully, pressing herself against the wall. Then she heard it, a soft whimpering sound like a child trying not to cry. She rounded a corner and found them. Was a young female who had been assigned to care for the Cubs. She was slumped against the wall, one hand pressed against a wound in her shoulder that leaked dark blood. Her fur was matted and her breathing was shallow. The 3 Cubs were huddled behind her, had her arms around her younger brothers trying to be brave. Bora was shaking, was crying silently, tears streaming down his pale fur. When saw, her eyes widened. "Human," she gasped, "you should not be here." Knelt beside her. The wound was bad. Plasma burns were difficult to treat even with proper medical equipment, and they had none. "What happened?" asked. Said, "They came for the Cubs, I fought them off, but more will come." She grabbed his arm with surprising strength. "You must take them, hide them, they will not kill them, they want them alive." Understood the horror in those words. Alive meant slavery. Alive meant being sold to the highest bidder, used as bargaining chips or worse. Death would be kinder. "I cannot fight," said. "I am not a warrior." "You do not need to fight," replied. "You need to hide. They are hunting, they will not be looking for a human, use that." She pressed something into his hands. It was a blade, a ceremonial knife with a curved edge and symbols carved into the handle. "Take this, protect them." Looked at the blade, then at the Cubs. Was staring at her with wide, frightened eyes. "Please," whispered, "please help us." Something shifted inside. Fear was still there, cold and heavy in her stomach. But something else was growing alongside it, something stronger. "I will," she said. She helped the cubs to their feet, clung to her leg, refusing to let go. She picked him up and held him against her chest, feeling his small heart beating rapidly against her own. "Stay close to me," she told Bora. "Do not make any sound. Can you do that?" They nodded. Looked back at. The young female's eyes were growing dim. "Go," said. "I will slow them down if more come." "You are dying." Managed a weak smile. "Then I will die with honor. Now go, human, keep our future safe." Wanted to say something, to offer comfort or thanks, but there was no time. She turned and led the cubs into the darkness of the maintenance tunnels that ran through the ship like veins. The tunnels were cramped and dark, had to bend almost double to move through them, and even the cubs had to duck their heads. They moved in single file, with in front holding, Bora in the middle, and bringing up the rear. Could hear sounds through the walls, distant explosions, screams, the clash of metal against metal. The ship was fighting for its life and she could do nothing to help. All she could do was keep moving. "Where are we going?" Bora whispered. "Cargo Bay 7, replied. "It is in the lower section of the ship. We'll focus on the upper decks where the command center and crew quarters are. We can hide there until the fighting is over." "What if the fighting does not stop?" asked quietly. Did not have an answer for that, so she said nothing. They crawled through the tunnels for what felt like hours, fell asleep against chest, exhausted by fear and stress. Bora's breathing grew heavy, but he did not complain, kept looking back as if expecting enemies to appear behind them at any moment. Finally, they reached a ventilation shaft that opened into Cargo Bay 7, peered through the grating, checking for danger. The bay was dark and silent, filled with crates and containers stacked in long rows. "It looks clear," she said. "Let me go first." She handed to, then pushed the grating open and dropped down to the floor. Her legs buckled when she landed, but she caught herself and looked around. Nothing moved. She helped the cubs down one by one, woke up and immediately reached for her again. She held him close. "We will hide here," she said. "Between the crates in the back corner, we will be safe." But even as she said the words, she heard a sound that made her blood freeze. Footsteps, hissing voices, the click of weapons being. They were not alone. Pushed the cubs behind a stack of metal crates, pressing them down with urgent hands. Started to whimper, and she covered his mouth gently, shaking her head. The little cub understood. He went silent, his golden eyes wide with terror. The footsteps grew louder, counted them in her head. At least 10, maybe more. They moved with the careful precision of hunters who knew their prey was close. "Thermal scanners show 4 heat signatures," a hissing voice said. "Small ones, the cubs are here." His heart sank. She had forgotten about thermal scanners. They could see body heat through walls and crates. There was nowhere to hide. She looked at the cubs, was holding her brothers close, her young face trying to be brave despite the fear in her eyes. Bora was trembling so hard that his fur shook, had buried his face in his chest. Thought about running. There were other exits from the cargo bay. Maybe she could lead the cubs to another hiding spot, buy more time. But then the lights came on. The cargo bay flooded with harsh white light, threw an arm over her eyes, blinded by the sudden brightness. When her vision cleared, she saw them. There were 12 of them, standing in a loose semicircle that blocked every possible escape route. They were tall creatures, almost as tall as but built differently. Their bodies were covered in green scales that shimmered like oil. They had long snouts filled with needle-like teeth, and their yellow eyes had vertical slits for pupils like snakes. Each one carried a weapon, not guns designed to kill, but tools designed to capture. Stun nets that could wrap around a target and shock them into unconsciousness. Shock prods that delivered enough electricity to drop a full-grown. Collar guns that could fire restraining devices around a neck from 20 meters away. They wanted the cubs alive. That knowledge was both a relief and a horror. At the front of the group stood their leader. He was larger than the others, with dark scales marked by old scars. One of his eyes was milky white, blinded in some past battle. He wore a necklace made of fangs, trophies from previous hunts. "Well, well," he said, his voice a wet hiss. "What do we have here?" He stepped forward, and his soldiers parted to let him through. His single good eye swept across the scene, taking in the 3 cubs huddled behind the crates and the human woman standing in front of them. "I am captain of the Dominion," he announced, "and you are the human that our intelligence mentioned, the diplomatic observer." He made a sound that might have been a laugh. "I did not expect to find you protecting whelps." Said nothing. Her hand tightened around the ceremonial blade that had given her. Noticed the weapon. His lipless mouth curved into something like a smile. "A blade," he said. "How charming. Do you even know how to use it?" Still said nothing. She was too busy calculating. 12 enemies, 1 exit blocked, 3 children who could not fight, 1 blade, no training, no backup. The math was simple. She was going to die. But not yet, not until she had no other choice. "Listen to me," human said, taking another step closer. "I have no quarrel with your kind. Humans are new to the galaxy. You have not yet earned our hatred." He gestured toward the cubs with one clawed hand. "Give us what we came for and you can walk away. I will even let you take one of the escape pods. You can return to your people and tell them that you survived an encounter with the Dominion. That is more than most can say." Behind let out a small sob, shushed him quickly. "These children," said slowly, "what will you do with them?" Shrugged, a movement that rippled through his scaled shoulders. "Sell them, most likely, the offspring of an alpha commander. They will fetch a high price in the shadow markets. There are collectors who pay fortunes for such rare specimens." His smile widened. "Or perhaps we will keep them as leverage. They are proud creatures. They will pay anything to get their precious cubs back. Either way, they will not be harmed. Dead merchandise has no value." Felt sick. She thought about what it would mean for these 3 children to grow up as slaves, as property, passed from owner to owner like objects. She thought about fierce spirit being broken, about Bora's gentle soul being crushed, about little never knowing freedom. She raised the blade. Smile faded. "You are joking." "I am not," said. The captain studied her with his one good eye. "You are not a warrior. I can see it in the way you hold that blade. You are not even holding it correctly. What do you think you can do against 12 trained soldiers?" "Probably nothing," admitted. Her voice was steady, even though her hands were shaking. "But I am going to try anyway." "Why?" Seemed genuinely curious. "They are not your kind. They are not your pack. You owe them nothing. Why would you die for creatures that are not even of your species?" Thought about that question. She thought about the first time she met the cubs, about pressing his warm little body against her leg, trying to keep her warm, about endless questions about Earth, about Bora sitting quietly beside her, asking for nothing but her presence. She thought about bleeding out in the corridor, refusing to give up until she knew the cubs were safe. She thought about her grandmother, who had survived a war on Earth decades ago. Her grandmother had told her stories about those dark days, about how people found courage they never knew they had, about how the worst times revealed the best in people. "Because someone has to," said. She positioned herself directly between and the cubs. Her legs were trembling. Her heart was beating so hard she could feel it in her throat. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to save herself, to let these alien children meet whatever fate awaited them. But she did not move. Stared at her for a long moment. Then he shook his head slowly. "You humans," he said. "I have heard stories about your species. They say you are weak, soft, that you have no natural weapons, no claws, no fangs, no armor." He paused. "But they also say that you are stubborn, that you do not know when to give up, that you will fight against impossible odds for reasons that make no sense." "We have our moments," said. Made that wet laughing sound again. "Yes, it seems you do." He raised one hand and gestured to his soldiers. Take her down, try not to kill her. I want to study her before we dispose of her." The soldiers advanced, took a deep breath. She adjusted her grip on the blade, trying to remember everything she had learned from watching the warriors train. It was not much. She had never been in a real fight in her life. She had never hurt anyone. But she was not going to let them take these children without a fight. The first soldier came at her with a shock prod. She ducked under his swing and slashed at his arm. The blade bit into scales and flesh, and the hissed in surprise and pain. Green blood sprayed across the floor. Before she could react, another soldier was on her. He swung his stun net and she barely dodged in time. The net hit a crate behind her and crackled with electricity. Spun and stabbed blindly. The blade caught the second soldier in the shoulder. He staggered back, cursing in his hissing language. 2 down, 10 to go. She did not have time to feel proud. A shock prod caught her in the ribs and pain exploded through her body. Every muscle locked up. She could not breathe. She could not think. She fell to her knees, gasping. But she did not let go of the blade. A grabbed her by the hair and yanked her head back. Another one pointed a collar gun at her throat. "Enough," said, walking toward her. "You have spirit, human, I will give you that, but spirit does not win battles. Strength wins battles. Weapons win battles." He leaned down until his face was inches from hers. His breath smelled like rotting meat. "And you have neither." Looked up at him. Her vision was blurry from pain. Her body felt like it was on fire, but she managed to smile. "Maybe not," she said, "but I am still standing between you and those cubs, and I will keep standing until I cannot stand anymore." So I narrowed, "So be it." He stepped back and nodded to his soldiers. "Break her." What happened next would become legend among both species. It would be told and retold in dens for generations. It would be studied by human military historians who could not explain it. It would become a story that parents told their children when they wanted to teach them about courage. But in that moment, it was simply a woman refusing to fall. The first blow came from behind. A shock prod slammed into his back, and she felt her spine arch from the electricity coursing through her. She screamed. The sound tore from her throat before she could stop it. She collapsed forward, her hands hitting the cold metal floor. The cubs were crying now. She could hear wailing, trying to calm him, Bora calling her name in a voice that broke her heart. "Get up," she told herself, "get up." She pushed herself to her hands and knees. A soldier kicked her in the ribs and she heard something crack. The pain was unbelievable. White lights exploded behind her eyes. She fell again. "Get up." She got up. The soldiers looked at each other in confusion. This was not how prey behaved. Prey stayed down when you hurt them. Prey submitted. Prey gave up. This human was not giving up. Swayed on her feet. Blood was running from a cut on her forehead, dripping into her eyes. She wiped it away with the back of her hand and raised the blade again. "Is that all you have?" she said. Her voice was weak, her words were slurred, but she was still standing. Watched with growing fascination. He had hunted hundreds of species across the galaxy. He had seen warriors and cowards, heroes and villains, but he had never seen anything quite like this. "Hit her again," he ordered. A soldier swung a shock prod at her head, ducked barely and drove her blade into his thigh. The screamed and fell. She pulled the blade free and stumbled backward, putting herself between the fallen soldier and the cubs once more. 3 down, 9 to go. Another soldier came at her. She was too slow this time. His claws raked across her back, tearing through her uniform and the skin beneath. She cried out and fell to one knee. "Get up." She got up. The cubs were watching with wide eyes. They had been raised on stories of heroes, warriors who fought against impossible odds and won through strength and skill. But this human had no strength, not compared to She had no skill, not compared to a trained soldier. All she had was refusal. She refused to stay down. She refused to step aside. She refused to let them take the children she had sworn to protect. And somehow, against all logic, she kept fighting. Lost track of time. The world became a blur of pain and movement. She was hit again and again. Shock prods, claws, fists. Each blow should have finished her. Each blow sent her to the ground. And each time she got back up. Her left arm was hanging useless at her side now, dislocated or broken, she could not tell which. Her vision was narrowing, darkness creeping in from the edges. She could barely stand. The blade felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. But she was still standing between thee and the cubs. She had managed to wound 5 more soldiers. None of them were dead, but they were hurt badly enough that they had pulled back. That left 4 still standing plus. The captain was no longer smiling. He was staring at with something that might have been respect or might have been fear. "What are you?" he hissed. Spat blood onto the floor. "I told you," she said, "I am a human." "Humans are weak." "Maybe." She raised the blade one more time. Her arm was shaking so badly she could barely hold it up. "But we do not quit." Drew his own blade, a long curved sword that had killed dozens of enemies. He was done watching. He would finish this himself. "Then die standing human," he said. He came at her fast, faster than any of his soldiers. His blade whistled through the air, aimed at her throat. Tried to dodge, but her body would not obey. She was too broken, too damaged, too exhausted. The blade caught her across the chest, cutting a deep gash from shoulder to hip. She stumbled backward and fell. This time, she did not get up right away. The world was fatting. She could hear the cubs screaming her name, but they sounded far away, like they were calling from the bottom of a deep well. She could feel blood pooling beneath her, warm and wet. "So this is it," she thought. "This is how I die." She had known it was coming. From the moment she saw those 12 soldiers, she had known she would not survive this fight. She had fought anyway, not because she thought she could win, but because giving up was not an option. The cubs needed her, so she fought. But now she could not fight anymore. Her body had nothing left to give. Stood over her, looking down with cold yellow eyes. "You fought well, human," he admitted. "Better than I expected, better than most warriors I have faced." He raised his blade for the killing stroke. "But in the end, you were still just one soft, weak creature against an army. This was always going to end the same way." Looked up at him. Her vision was almost gone now, but she could still see the cubs behind him. Was holding her brothers, tears streaming down her fur. She was trying to shield them from what was about to happen. "I am sorry," thought. "I tried." But then something strange happened. Even as she lay there dying, she reached out one hand and grabbed his ankle. He looked down in surprise. "What are you doing?" She did not have the strength to answer, but she held on. With everything she had left, she held on. It was a meaningless gesture. She could not stop him. She could not hurt him. All she could do was delay him by a few seconds. But sometimes, a few seconds was all that mattered. The cargo bay doors exploded inward. The force of the blast sent stumbling. He whirled around, blade raised, and froze at what he saw. Commander stood in the doorway, silhouetted by fire and smoke. Behind him were 24 warriors, covered in blood but very much alive. They had fought their way through the ship, clearing deck after deck of invaders. And they had come for their cubs. Took in the scene with a single glance. He saw the wounded soldiers. He saw the pools of blood, both green and red. He saw his children huddled in the corner, terrified but unharmed. And he saw the human lying on the floor, broken and bleeding, still holding onto his ankle with one hand and the ceremonial blade with the other. Still protecting his cubs. Something shifted in his golden eyes. Something that had been cold and distant became hot and fierce. He said one word. "Kill them." The warriors fell upon them like a storm. It was not a battle. It was a slaughter. Within seconds, 8 of the 12 soldiers were dead. The remaining 4 tried to surrender, but they were beyond mercy. Tried to flee. He made it 3 steps before caught him. The commander did not say anything. He simply grabbed by the throat and lifted him off his feet. The captain clawed its arm, but he might as well have been clawing at stone. Squeezed. There was a crack and went limp. Dropped the body and turned to the cubs. They ran to him, crying, and he gathered all 3 of them in his arms. For a moment, the fearsome commander was just a father, holding his children, grateful beyond words that they were alive. Then pulled at his fur. "Father, the human, you have to help the human." Looked down at, she had finally let go of the blade. Her eyes were closed and her breathing was shallow. She looked like she was already dead. But she was not yet. Knelt beside her. He looked at her wounds, at the blood, at the evidence of what she had done. He looked at the fallen soldiers and the trail of destruction that led back to a human woman who had no business surviving any of this. "Human," he said softly, "Lieutenant Park." His eyes fluttered open. They were unfocused, dazed, but she managed to look at him. "The cubs," she whispered, "are the cubs safe?" Felt something he had not felt in many years. His eyes burned, and he had to blink to clear them. "They are safe," he said, "because of you." Smiled. It was a small smile, barely more than a twitch of her lips, but it was real. "Good," she said, "that is good." Then her eyes closed, and she did not open them again. Woke up 3 weeks later. The first thing she saw was white ceiling tiles. The second thing she saw was medical equipment beeping softly beside her bed. The third thing she saw was a small face with silver fur staring at her from very close distance. "She is awake," shouted. "Father, mother, the human is awake." The cub jumped off the bed and ran out of the room, still shouting. Tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. Pain flared through her entire body, and she fell back against the pillows with a groan. A medical officer appeared at her side. He was an older male with gray fur and gentle hands. "Do not try to move," he said. "You had 17 broken bones, internal bleeding, a collapsed lung, and more cuts than I could count. It is a miracle you survived." "How long?" asked. Her voice was rough, like she had swallowed sand. 3 weeks. We kept you in a medical coma while your body healed." The doctor paused. "The cubs refused to leave your side. We had to force them to eat and sleep." Before could respond, the door burst open. Bora and rushed in, followed by their parents. The cubs swarmed the bed, careful not to touch too hard but desperate to be close to her. "You are alive," said. "We were so worried." "I drew pictures for you," Bora added shyly. "Every day they are on the wall." Turned her head and saw the wall beside her bed. It was covered in drawings. Crude, childish drawings of a human woman fighting monsters, protecting cubs, standing tall against the darkness. In every picture, the human was smiling. Tears welled up in his eyes. She did not try to stop them. Climbed onto the bed and curled up against her side, the same way he had done in the observation deck all those weeks ago. "I knew you would wake up," he said. "I knew it." Commander and Alpha Mother Sira stood at the foot of the bed. They looked different than remembered. His face, which had always been cold and hard, was softer now. Sira was smiling openly, something had never seen before. "Lieutenant Park," said. His voice was formal, but there was warmth underneath. "How do you feel?" "Like I was hit by a spaceship," admitted. Made a sound that might have been a laugh. "You look like it too." Sira stepped forward and took his hand in both of hers. The gesture was surprisingly tender. "What you did," Sira said, "no words can express our gratitude. You saved our children. You nearly died protecting them. You fought against impossible odds and refused to surrender." Her voice trembled. "You have the heart of a warrior." "I just did what anyone would do," said. "No," shook his head firmly. "You did not. Any other species would have stepped aside. They would have saved themselves. They offered you your life and you refused." He paused. I was wrong about humans. I thought you were weak because you have no claws, no fangs, no natural weapons. But I understand now that your strength is not in your body." "Where is it?" asked. Placed one massive clawed hand over his own chest. "Here, in your spirit, in your refusal to give up, in your willingness to die for those who are not your own blood." He met her eyes and his gaze was fierce. "That is a strength greater than any claw or fang." Did not know what to say. She had never been good with compliments, and this was far more than a compliment. This was recognition from a species that valued strength above all else. "The Council has made a decision," continued. "For the first time in our history, we are offering formal adoption to an outsider. You are no longer human alone. You are," he pulled something from his belt and held it up. "You are Pack." It was the ceremonial blade. The one had given her, the one she had used to fight off but it looked different now. The handle had been replaced with something new, dark wood wrapped in silver wire. Symbols were carved along the blade, and they seemed to glow faintly in the light. "This blade has been given a name," said. "We call it Human's Promise. It will be passed down through my bloodline for generations, so that our children and our children's children will remember what happened here. They will remember what you did." He placed the blade in her hands. It felt lighter now, or maybe she felt stronger. "What does the inscription say?" she asked. It was who answered. The young cub had clearly been practicing for this moment. "Because someone has to," she said. "Those were the words you said to Captain. We asked before she died. She told us everything." Her voice cracked. "She said you were the bravest creature she had ever seen." Had not forgotten the young female who had given her the blade and held the corridor long enough for them to escape. She had hoped, somehow, that had survived. "She died protecting us too," Bora said quietly. "Father says she will be remembered forever." Closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, she looked at. "Thank you," she said, "for everything, for saving us, for giving me this honor." She paused. "But I need you to know something. I did not fight those soldiers because I wanted to be a hero. I did not do it for recognition or honor or glory. I did it because 3 children were in danger and I was the only one who could help them." Nodded slowly. "I know, that is what makes it remarkable." The weeks that followed were a blur of recovery and celebration. News of what had happened aboard the starward Fang spread across the galaxy. The story of a single human woman holding off 12 soldiers to protect 3 cubs became the talk of every species. Some did not believe it. They said it was propaganda, exaggeration, or outright fiction. Humans were weak, they argued. They could not possibly have done what they claimed. But then they released the security footage. Every camera in Cargo Bay 7 had recorded the fight. The footage showed everything. It showed taking hit after hit and getting back up. It showed her wounded and bleeding but still refusing to yield. It showed her grabbing his ankle with her final breath, buying the seconds that saved her and the cubs. The footage went viral across every inhabited system. On Earth became an overnight hero. People who had never heard of the suddenly cared deeply about what happened in a cargo bay millions of light years away. Parents named their children after her. Schools taught her story. The Human Coalition gave her the highest honors they could offer. But did not care about any of that. What she cared about was the moment when she finally walked again. When she left the medical bay under her own power and made her way to the observation deck, where she had once sat with 3 cubs sleeping around her. The cubs were waiting for her. So were their parents and most of the crew. When she stepped through the door, every in the room stood at attention. Even the ones who had looked down on her before, who had dismissed her as useless and weak. They stood tall and placed their right hands over their hearts. It was the salute of highest respect. Stood there, a small human woman surrounded by 7-foot wolf warriors, and she felt something she had not felt since leaving Earth. She felt like she belonged. Years later, When the Galactic Council debated whether humanity should receive full membership in the galactic community, the delegate stood first. He was an old warrior now, with scars covering his silver fur. His name was, and he had retired from military service to serve as a diplomat. "The vote yes," he said, "and any who vote no will answer to us." The chamber fell silent. Other delegates shifted nervously. "Why?" one of them asked. "Why do they support the humans so strongly?" Smiled, a rare expression for his kind. "Because we have seen what they are capable of, not their ships, not their weapons, not their technology." He looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of delegates from 100 different species. "We have seen their spirit. We have seen what they will do for those they love. And we have learned that there is no force in the galaxy more powerful than a human who has decided that something matters more than their own life." The vote was unanimous. On Earth, in a small house near the coast, an elderly woman sat surrounded by her. She had gray hair now and wrinkles lined her face, but her eyes were still sharp and her smile was still warm. 3 visitors sat on the floor nearby, fully grown now but still looking at her with the same adoration they had shown as cubs. Was a warrior captain. Bora was a doctor, was an ambassador. They still called her Pack Mother. Above the fireplace hung a blade with symbols carved along its edge. The symbols glowed faintly in the light of the setting sun, and anyone who could read them would see 4 simple words. Because someone has to. The old woman looked at her, at the faces of 2 species united by love and sacrifice, and the simple truth that family was not about blood. She smiled, and she knew that whatever came next, she had done something that mattered. She had stood between darkness and light, between hunters and children, between fear and hope. And she had not moved. That was enough. That was more than enough. That was everything.